The ruins of Berlin. The spring of 1945 brought more than blooming flowers to Berlin. It brought devastation. Thomas Richter stood among the rubble of what had once been the Ministry of Science building, his shovel biting into broken concrete and twisted metal. At 53, he was too old for the front lines, but young enough to clear the ruins of his dying city. "Careful with that beam," his partner called out. Joseph Kramer, a former university professor turned laborer, wiped sweat from his brow despite the cool morning air. The war had made equals of them all: doctors, teachers, bankers, all now wielding shovels instead of pens. The bombing raid 3 nights prior had been particularly savage. American B-17s had turned the government quarter into a hellscape of fire and destruction. Now, with the Red Army advancing from the east and the Allies from the west, the Nazi leadership had ordered the rubble cleared to maintain some semblance of normalcy. It was futile, Thomas thought, but orders were orders, and disobedience meant death. "There's something odd here," Thomas muttered, his shovel striking something that echoed hollowly. He knelt down, brushing away dust and debris with his bare hands. Beneath the rubble lay a steel door, barely visible and remarkably intact despite the destruction around it. Joseph joined him, and together they worked to expose more of the entrance. The door bore no markings, no signs, nothing to indicate what lay beyond. But it was sealed with a sophisticated locking mechanism that seemed far too elaborate for a simple basement storage room. "We should report this," Joseph whispered, glancing around nervously. 2 SS officers patrolled the next block over, their black uniforms stark against the gray ruins. Everyone knew that discovering military secrets could be as dangerous as missing them. Thomas hesitated, his fingers tracing the seal around the door. Something about it felt wrong, or perhaps right in a way that made his heart race. After 5 years of war, he had developed an instinct for things that mattered. 5 more minutes, he said quietly, just to see if we can open it. They worked the locking mechanism with careful precision. It was German engineering at its finest, complex yet logical. Thomas, who had worked in a machine shop before the war, recognized the pattern. After 20 minutes of manipulation, something clicked deep within the mechanism. The door swung inward with surprising ease, releasing a rush of stale air that hadn't been disturbed in years. Beyond lay a staircase, descending into darkness, untouched by the bombing that had destroyed everything above. "We need light," Joseph said, but his voice betrayed his excitement. The professor in him couldn't resist a mystery. Thomas struck a match, its small flame barely penetrating the gloom. They descended carefully, their footsteps echoing off concrete walls. The passage seemed to extend far deeper than a normal basement would. After descending what Thomas estimated to be 3 stories underground, they reached another door. This one opened easily, and what lay beyond made both men freeze in shock. The chamber was vast, at least 50 meters square, and filled with equipment that seemed to belong in a science fiction novel rather than wartime Berlin. Strange machines hummed with barely perceptible power. They still had electricity, somehow connected to some independent source. Walls covered in blackboards displayed complex mathematical equations that made Joseph's eyes widen in recognition. "Mein Gott," the professor breathed. This is advanced physics. Quantum mechanics. This shouldn't exist. Not yet not." He stopped mid-sentence, his gaze falling on a metal cylinder in the center of the room. It stood upright, about 2 meters tall and 1 meter in diameter, with cables running from it to the various machines around the chamber. The surface gleamed with an otherworldly quality, and strange symbols marked its surface. Thomas approached it slowly, drawn by something he couldn't explain. As he drew closer, he noticed a leather journal lying on a nearby desk, its pages filled with handwritten notes in German. He opened it carefully, reading the first entry. "January 15th, 1942. We have made contact. They have agreed to share their knowledge in exchange for..." The rest of the sentence was crossed out so heavily that the paper had nearly torn. Both men looked at each other, understanding simultaneously dawning on them. They had found something that governments had hidden, something that the bombing was perhaps meant to destroy. and now they had to decide what to do with it. The journal's secrets. Joseph took the journal from Thomas's trembling hands, his academic training overriding his fear. As a professor of theoretical physics at the University of Berlin, before the war had closed its doors, he had the knowledge to understand what he was reading. And what he was reading terrified him. "Thomas," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the chamber's strange quietness. "This is dated throughout 1942 and 1943. Someone was conducting experiments here for at least 2 years. But look," he pointed to the dust patterns on the floor. "No one has been here for months, maybe longer. They abandoned it." Thomas moved around the chamber carefully, examining the equipment. Most of it was beyond his understanding, but he recognized certain elements: generators, cooling systems, observation instruments. Whatever they were doing here required enormous amounts of power and secrecy. Joseph turned the pages slowly, his face growing paler with each entry. "Listen to this. March 3rd, 1942. The entity communicates through the device using mathematical principles we are only beginning to understand. It claims to be from beyond our dimensional space, existing in what it calls the quantum foam. It offers technological advancement, weapons, energy sources, transportation methods, all beyond our current scientific understanding." "Entity," Thomas echoed. "What kind of entity?" "Keep listening." Joseph continued reading. April 12, 1942. The entity demands payment. It requires what it calls consciousness energy, human minds, aware and terrified. It feeds on fear and pain. I have expressed our moral objections, but Dr. Schneider insists that the fatherland's survival justifies any cost. The entity has shown us designs for a weapon that could end the war in days. All it asks in return is access to prisoners from the camps. The implications hung in the air like poison gas. Thomas felt his stomach turn. They were going to trade lives for weapons. The camps. "It's worse than that," Joseph said, flipping forward several pages. "Look at this entry from June 1943. The entity has deceived us. The weapon designs are flawed, intentionally so. Each test ends in catastrophic failure. Dr. Schneider refuses to see the pattern. He believes we simply need more test subjects, more consciousness energy to feed the entity. But I have studied its mathematics, and I see the truth. It wants us to destroy ourselves. The weapon will not save Germany. It will obliterate Berlin and everything within 100 kilometers." Thomas approached the metal cylinder at the center of the room. Now that he looked more closely, he could see scorch marks on the floor around it, as if something had burned intensely in a perfect circle. Is this the device they use to communicate with it?" Joseph nodded, still reading. "The last entry is from December 1943. I have convinced Reichsfuhrer Himmler that the project must be sealed. The entity's demands have grown too extreme, and the weapon designs continue to fail. He agrees that whatever benefit this might bring is outweighed by the risk of what we've unleashed. Tomorrow, we seal this chamber forever. The device will be entombed, the generators set to run indefinitely to maintain the containment field. God forgive us for what we've done. God forgive us for what we've created." "But they didn't destroy it," Thomas observed. "They just locked it away. Probably couldn't figure out how to safely destroy it," Joseph replied. "Or were afraid of what would happen if they tried." As if in response to their conversation, the cylinder began to emit a low humming sound. Both men stepped back instinctively. The symbols on its surface started to glow with a faint blue light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. "We should leave," Thomas said urgently. "Now." But Joseph was mesmerized, reading further. "Wait, there are calculations here. The author, I think it was someone named Dr. Braun, he figured out the truth. The entity isn't from another dimension. It's a weapon itself, created by whoever, whatever, sent it. It's designed to infiltrate civilizations at their most desperate moments, offering salvation while actually ensuring destruction. It's happened before, according to Braun's theories. Ancient civilizations that vanished mysteriously. He found evidence in archaeological records. The humming grew louder. The machines around the chamber began activating one by one, lights flickering to life after months of dormancy. It knows we're here, Thomas breathed. How was that possible? Joseph grabbed his arm. The journal mentions observers. The entity can detect consciousness nearby. When we opened the doors, when we started reading about it, thinking about it, we activated it. The temperature in the chamber dropped suddenly. Their breath became visible in the cold air. And then, floating in the air above the cylinder, symbols began forming. The same strange markings that covered the device's surface, but now burning in cold blue fire. Joseph's academic mind worked frantically. It's mathematics. Advanced mathematics. It's trying to communicate. Or trying to get into our heads, Thomas countered. He pulled Joseph toward the exit. Whatever the Nazis couldn't destroy, we can't control. We need to seal this back up in... And what? Joseph jerked free. Leave it for the Russians? The Americans? Do you think they'll be any more resistant to its promises? Any less desperate? The war may be ending, but the suffering isn't. Whoever finds this next will be tempted. Someone always is. Thomas understood the weight of their decision. They could leave now, seal the door, report to... The SS would execute them for knowing about it. The Allies would arrive soon. But would they believe 2 German workers? Would they be any less susceptible to the entity's promises? Or they could stay, try to understand what they were dealing with, and perhaps find a way to destroy it before anyone else discovered it. The symbols in the air reformed, and this time Joseph gasped. Thomas, it's showing us equations. Not for weapons. For medicine. For agriculture. For clean energy. It's showing us how to feed millions, cure diseases, power cities without coal or oil. It's showing you what you want to see, Thomas warned. That's what it does. But Joseph was already moving closer to the cylinder, drawn by the promise of knowledge that could save instead of destroy. The choice. Thomas grabbed Joseph's shoulder hard enough to spin the professor around. Listen to yourself. 2 minutes ago, you were reading about how this thing deceived the Nazis, and now you're falling for the same trap. Joseph's eyes held a feverish gleam that frightened Thomas more than the glowing symbols floating in the air. But don't you see? The Nazis were evil, morally bankrupt. They wanted weapons, domination, death. We're different. We want to help people, rebuild, heal. Every monster thinks they're different, Thomas interrupted. Every dictator believes their cause justifies the means. That's what this thing counts on. The humming from the cylinder intensified, and the symbols rearranged themselves into something new. Thomas couldn't read them, but Joseph could. His education in advanced mathematics made him vulnerable to the entity's communication. It says it was wrong to offer weapons to the Nazis. Joseph translated, his voice distant. It misjudged humanity. It thought we wanted destruction, but now it understands. It's offering atonement, real knowledge, pure science, without the corruption of military application. Thomas had worked construction sites and factories his whole life. He'd never had Joseph's education, never understood quantum physics or advanced mathematics. But he understood people, and he understood lies. Joseph, listen to me. Thomas positioned himself between the professor and the cylinder. Think about it logically. If this entity is so powerful, so advanced, why does it need us? Why does it need human consciousness, human fear? The journal said it feeds on it. That's not atonement. That's predation. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across Joseph's face. The journal, yes, Braun wrote about consciousness energy, but maybe he misunderstood. Scientific inquiry requires us to question our assumptions. Scientific inquiry requires evidence, Thomas pressed. And the evidence is that every scientist who worked with this thing ended up dead or sealed it away in terror. The evidence is that it's been dormant for over a year, and the moment we show up, it starts making promises. That's not science, Joseph. That's salesmanship. And what it's selling is poison wrapped in gold paper. The temperature dropped further. Frost formed on the metal equipment around the chamber. The symbols floating in the air turned from blue to a deep red, like embers in a dying fire. Joseph shivered, and the feverish look in his eyes began to clear. You're right. God help me, you're right. What was I thinking? You were thinking like someone who's watched his world burn for 5 years, Thomas said gently. Like someone desperate for hope. That's what it feeds on, desperation. The symbols pulsed angrily now, and new ones formed. Joseph gasped. It's threatening us. It says if we don't cooperate, it will reach out to the first person who enters this chamber after we leave. It will find someone more willing, someone more desperate. Then we make sure no one else finds this chamber, Thomas said firmly. He grabbed a metal pipe from the rubble near the entrance. We destroy the device. We don't know what that will do. Joseph protested. The journal said the Nazis were afraid to destroy it. What if it causes an explosion? What if it releases whatever this entity is into our world? Thomas weighed the pipe in his hands. And what if we do nothing? You said it yourself. Someone will always be tempted. If not now, then after the war. The Americans, the Russians, they'll find this place eventually. They'll dig through the ruins, find this chamber, and we'll have the same situation all over again. Except they'll have even more resources, more desperate reasons to use it. The symbols shifted again, this time forming images, not mathematical equations, but pictures. They showed cities rebuilt, children fed, hospitals full of healing patients. Then the images changed. Mushroom clouds, cities in flames, bodies in the streets. A clear message: cooperate or watch the world burn. It's showing us the future, Joseph whispered. It's showing us what it wants us to believe is the future, Thomas corrected. Braun figured out its pattern. It shows salvation, delivers damnation. Every time, the weapon designs that failed, the promises that turned to ash, that's what this thing does. Joseph looked at the journal in his hands, then at the cylinder, then back at Thomas. The academic in him warred with the human in him. Finally, the human won. What do we do? He asked simply. Thomas pointed to the generators humming around the chamber. The journal said these maintain a containment field. What happens if we shut them down? Joseph flipped through the pages frantically. Braun's notes suggest the entity needs the field to maintain its connection to our reality. Without it, the device becomes inert, just metal and circuits. But there's a catch. The shutdown has to be complete and simultaneous. If any generator remains active, the entity will use that connection to maintain its presence. How many generators? 6, positioned around the chamber in a hexagonal pattern. Thomas surveyed the room. He could see 4 of the generators easily, their bulk unmistakable. Can you find the other 2? Joseph moved around the chamber, his eyes scanning the shadows. There, and there. He pointed to 2 recessed alcoves, barely visible in the dim emergency lighting. But Thomas, we have a problem. Look at the control panels. They require simultaneous input. 2 people can't reach all 6 at once. The cylinder's symbols flared brightly, sensing their intent. The humming became almost unbearable, a sound that seemed to vibrate through Thomas's bones and into his thoughts. He felt something pushing at the edges of his mind. Promises, threats, visions of futures both beautiful and terrible. Then we improvise, Thomas grunted, fighting off the mental intrusion. He grabbed loose cables from the damaged equipment. Can you rig these to trigger the shutdown remotely? Joseph's academic training took over. Despite the pressure building in his head, despite the fear coursing through him, he was still a scientist. Yes, I think so. If I connect the control circuits to a single trigger point, but it will take time. How much time? 20 minutes. Maybe 30. Thomas looked up at the symbols, now swirling in agitated patterns above the cylinder. I don't think we have 30 minutes. As if to confirm his fear, they heard voices from above, German voices, authoritarian and commanding. The SS patrol they'd seen earlier, drawn by the light spilling from the chamber entrance. Joseph and Thomas locked eyes. They were trapped between the entity below and the Nazis above. And time was running out. Race against time. Schnell, here in. The SS officer's voice echoed down the stairwell, accompanied by the distinctive sound of boots on concrete. Multiple boots. Thomas moved with the quick efficiency of a man who'd survived 5 years of war by thinking fast. He pushed Joseph toward the generators. Start rigging those cables. I'll slow them down. Thomas, they'll shoot you. They'll shoot both of us if we don't give them a reason to hesitate. Thomas grabbed the leather journal and tucked it into his jacket. This is evidence. proof that this project was sealed by Himmler's orders. That might buy us minutes. Joseph didn't argue further. He rushed to the nearest generator, his hands working frantically to strip wires and connect circuits. His fingers, more accustomed to chalk and paper than electrical work, fumbled with the cables. Thomas positioned himself at the chamber entrance, climbing halfway up the stairs so he could see the SS officers descending. There were 3 of them, a Hauptsturmführer and 2 enlisted men, all armed with MP-40 submachine guns. "Halt!" Thomas called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone with nothing left to lose. "This area is sealed by order of Reichsfuhrer Himmler himself. You are not authorized to proceed." The Hauptsturmführer, a lean man with cold blue eyes, paused on the stairs. "And who are you to tell us what is authorized?" "A worker following orders. Same as you." Thomas pulled out the journal, showing its cover marked with official SS stamps. This facility was sealed in December 1943. Those orders haven't been rescinded. You can confirm with headquarters, if headquarters still exists. It was a gamble. Communications in Berlin were chaos, with most command structures shattered by the relentless bombing and the approaching Soviet forces. The Hauptsturmführer knew it too. His eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Let me see that journal." "Can't, sir. Orders specify it remains in the chamber at all times. But you're welcome to read it here." The officer descended a few more steps, close enough now that Thomas could smell the schnapps on his breath. 3 days until Germany's complete collapse, and the SS were drinking away their last days of power. Behind Thomas, in the chamber, Joseph worked feverishly. He'd connected 2 of the generators to a makeshift trigger circuit. For more to go. The symbols above the cylinder had turned a furious crimson, sensing their plan. "What is this place?" the Hauptsturmführer demanded, trying to peer past Thomas into the chamber. "Experimental weapons research. Discontinued. Dangerous to disturb." Thomas kept his body blocking the view, aware that if the officer saw the cylinder and its impossible geometry, curiosity would override caution. "Everything is dangerous now," the officer said bitterly. "The Russians will be here in days. The Americans in weeks. What difference does one more experimental weapon make?" "This one doesn't work," Thomas said flatly. "That's why they sealed it. It killed everyone who tried to use it." For a moment, desperation warred with self-preservation in the officer's eyes. Thomas saw it clearly, the dying gasp of a regime that had promised superiority and delivered only destruction. The officer wanted to believe that something down here could save them, could turn the tide of the lost war. Then a strange sound came from the chamber, a whispering that seemed to speak directly into the mind rather than through the ears. The symbols had found a new target. The Hauptsturmführer's expression changed. His eyes widened, pupils dilating. "I hear. There's something down there. Something powerful." "Sir, no," one of the enlisted men started, but the officer pushed past Thomas, drawn toward the chamber by the entity's promises. Thomas grabbed his arm. "Don't. It's a trap. It's what killed the others. Unhand me." The officer struck Thomas across the face with his pistol. Thomas fell backward, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. The officer descended into the chamber, his weapon lowered, his entire attention focused on the glowing cylinder. Joseph looked up from his work, his face pale. 3 more generators. I need 2 more minutes." The Hauptsturmführer approached the cylinder like a man in a trance. "It's showing me victories, weapons that could win the war. Technology beyond imagination." He reached out toward the glowing symbols. "Don't touch it," Joseph shouted. The officer's hand passed through the floating symbols, and he gasped. His body went rigid, his eyes rolling back until only the whites showed. When he spoke again, his voice was layered, his own voice underneath, but something else speaking through him. "Finally, a willing vessel. Your resistance was admirable, academics and laborers, but this one wants what I offer. Power, purpose, the ability to reshape the world." The 2 enlisted men had followed their officer into the chamber. Now they raised their weapons, confused and frightened by what they were witnessing. Thomas pulled himself to his feet, wiping blood from his eyes. "Joseph, how much longer?" 1 minute, maybe less." The possessed Hauptsturmführer turned toward them, and Thomas saw that his face had changed somehow. The features were the same, but the expression was wrong, too symmetrical, too perfect, like a mask worn by something that didn't quite understand human emotions. "You cannot shut down the generators," the entity spoke through the officer. "This vessel will stop you. And when the Allies arrive, I will offer them what I offer the Germans. Salvation. Hope. The keys to victory over their enemies. Someone always accepts. Someone is always desperate enough." Joseph connected the fourth generator, then the fifth. One more go. His hands shook as he stripped the final cable. "Shoot them," the entity commanded through the officer. One of the enlisted men raised his MP-40, but the other grabbed the barrel. "Sir, these are just workers. We're not executioners. Shoot them, or I'll shoot you." The possessed officer aimed his pistol at his own man. In that moment of distraction, Thomas made his move. He launched himself at the cylinder, the metal pipe still in his hand. "Don't!" Joseph screamed. "We don't know what striking it directly will do." But Thomas had made his calculation. They were out of time and out of options. He swung the pipe with all his strength at the base of the cylinder. The impact rang like a bell, and suddenly everything happened at once. The symbols exploded outward in a nova of blue light. The possessed Hauptsturmfer screamed, a sound that came from multiple throats simultaneously. The generators surged with power, their hum becoming a roar. And Joseph, finishing his work in that moment of chaos, triggered the shutdown sequence. Darkness fell like a hammer. Aftermath. The silence that followed was absolute. In the pitch darkness of the sealed chamber, Thomas could hear only his own ragged breathing and Joseph's quiet sobbing somewhere to his left. The eternal hum of the generators had ceased. The whispers that had pushed at the edges of his consciousness were gone. Even the sound of the SS officers was absent. No boots on concrete. No orders barked. No weapons firing. "Joseph," Thomas called out softly, "are you hurt?" And no, not physically. Joseph's voice trembled. "The light. Did you see the light?" Thomas had seen it. When the generators shut down and the entity's connection severed, the symbols hadn't just faded. They'd exploded, a final desperate burst of energy seeking any consciousness to latch onto. The Hauptsturmfer had taken the brunt of it, but they'd all felt the pressure, the alien presence trying to force its way into their minds. "We need to get out," Thomas said. He fumbled in his pockets and found matches. The small flame revealed a scene of devastation. The cylinder was cracked, a long fissure running down its length. Strange liquid leaked from it. Not water or oil, but something that seemed to shift colors in the matchlight, cycling through hues that hurt to look at directly. The machines around the chamber were dark and silent, several of them melted or scorched. And on the floor, scattered like broken dolls, lay the 3 SS officers. Joseph struck his own matches, and they approached the bodies carefully. The 2 enlisted men were unconscious but breathing, their faces peaceful as though they'd simply fallen asleep. But the Hauptsturmfer, "God in heaven," Joseph whispered. The officer's eyes were open, staring at nothing. His face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror, mouth stretched wide in a silent scream. But worse than that were the burns. Not physical burns, but patterns etched into his skin, the same symbols that had floated in the air. They covered every visible inch of him, glowing faintly even now, as if branded there by the entity's final departure. "Is he dead?" Thomas asked. Joseph checked for a pulse, then drew back quickly. "No, but he's not." There's nothing behind his eyes. It's like the person he was is gone. The entity didn't just leave, it took something with it. Thomas felt bile rise in his throat. This was the entity's true nature revealed. Not a gift giver or teacher, but a predator that fed on consciousness itself. The Hauptsturmfer had opened himself fully to its presence, and it had consumed him from the inside out. "We need to make sure it's really dead," Thomas said, "or trapped, or whatever we did to it." Joseph nodded, pulling himself together with the discipline of academic training. He moved to the cracked cylinder, studying it carefully in the flickering matchlight. The containment field collapse? It was catastrophic. The entity's connection to our dimensional space has been severed. The device itself is destroyed beyond repair. But what? The patterns on the officer's skin, they're still glowing. Faintly, but consistently. Some fragment of it might still be present, trapped in his mind or body. Not enough to communicate or act directly, but what happens if someone finds him and studies those symbols? Thomas finished the thought. If someone tries to recreate them, understand them. Joseph's expression darkened. Then we've just delayed the inevitable. The knowledge exists now, somewhere in the Hauptsturmführer's comatose mind, in these broken machines, in the very structure of this device. Someone could piece it together. Thomas looked around the chamber with new understanding. They hadn't destroyed the threat. They'd only contained it. And in a city about to be conquered by two rival superpowers, both desperate for any advantage in the coming Cold War, this chamber and its secrets would be a prize beyond measure. The journal, Joseph said suddenly. Braun's journal. It contains warnings, explanations of what this thing really is. If the Allies find this place without that context, they'll make the same mistakes the Nazis did. The journal has to survive. Someone has to understand the danger. Thomas pulled the journal from his jacket. Its leather cover was cracked and bloodstained now, but the pages inside were intact. We take it with us. We find someone we trust, someone who will understand and won't be seduced by the promise of power. Boo! Joseph laughed bitterly. The Americans will want it for weapons research. The Russians will want it for the same reason. Our own people. There's no Germany left to trust. The two enlisted SS men began to stir. Thomas and Joseph exchanged glances. They had minutes before the soldiers woke up, before questions were asked, before reports were filed. We seal the chamber again, Thomas decided. We take the journal, and we make sure no one can easily find this place. Ow! Thomas gestured to the rubble-filled stairwell. Berlin is being bombed every night. Buildings collapse constantly. If this entrance were to suffer structural damage, if this whole section were buried under tons of concrete and steel, Joseph understood immediately. We need explosives, or another bombing raid. There will be another raid. There's always another raid. Thomas moved to the enlisted men, checking their condition. Both were coming around, groaning softly. Help me get these two up the stairs. The Hauptsturmführer, we leave him. Let whoever finds this place see what the entity does to those who trust it completely. They worked quickly, dragging the semi-conscious soldiers up the stairs and out into the gray morning light. The ruins of Berlin stretched in every direction, a landscape of destruction so complete it looked almost peaceful. Joseph took one last look at the chamber entrance. We're making a choice for all of humanity. What if we're wrong? What if the entity could have helped, if approached differently? Thomas thought about the Hauptsturmführer's empty eyes, about the journal's accounts of deception and failure, about his own near surrender to the entity's promises. Then history will judge us poorly. But I'd rather be judged for caution than damnation. They sealed the steel door, using debris to cover the entrance. By the time they finished, the bombers were audible in the distance, the daily American raid, right on schedule. Run, Thomas said. They ran. Behind them, the bombs began to fall. Legacy. 50 years later, Berlin, 1995. The reunified city gleamed with new construction and renewed purpose. Where ruins had once stood, modern buildings reached toward the sky. But beneath the surface, old secrets remained buried. Dr. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her hard hat as the construction crew broke through another layer of Cold War-era concrete. The American archaeologists had been hired to survey the site before a new government office building went up. Standard procedure to check for unexploded ordnance or historically significant artifacts. Dr. Mitchell, one of the workers, called out in German-accented English. You need to see this. She climbed down into the excavated foundation, her heart rate quickening with the thrill that came from every significant discovery. The worker pointed to an exposed section of wall, old concrete, much older than the Cold War structures above it. Nazi-era construction, she murmured, running her gloved hand across the surface. This area was government buildings before the war. Ministry of Science, according to the old maps. There's a door, another worker said. Steel door sealed tight. The ground-penetrating radar shows a large chamber below. Sarah's mind raced through protocols. Sealed Nazi facilities could contain anything from mundane records to war crimes evidence to unexploded bombs. We need to proceed carefully. Everyone back to safety distance while I assess the entrance. 2 hours later, with proper equipment and a German federal observer present, they opened the door. The stairs beyond looked stable, and Sarah descended with a flashlight and camera, documenting everything. The chamber took her breath away. Even after 5 decades, the advanced equipment was recognizable. This wasn't a storage room or bunker. This was a laboratory, a secret research facility that somehow had escaped discovery by both the Soviet occupation and the later West German surveys. And in the center of the room, wrapped in 50 years of dust, sat a cracked metal cylinder covered in strange symbols. On the floor beside it lay a skeleton in the remnants of an SS uniform, the bones bearing unusual markings that Sarah's training couldn't explain. The symbols on the skeleton matched those on the cylinder. Incredible, she breathed, photographing everything. This was the find of a career, physical evidence of Nazi scientific programs that had been lost to history. As she worked, her camera flash reflecting off the dead machines, she noticed something on a desk in the corner. A leather journal, preserved by the chamber's sealed environment. Sarah picked it up carefully. The cover bore SS insignia, but when she opened it, she found handwritten entries in German. Her graduate studies had included translation work, and she began to read. January 15th, 1942. We have made contact. 2 hours passed as Sarah read, her excitement slowly transforming into growing unease. This wasn't a typical scientific journal. This was a warning. The entries detailed experiments with something impossible, an entity from beyond normal space, offering advanced technology in exchange for human consciousness. She reached the final entries, written in December 1943, describing the decision to seal the facility. Then, tucked in the back of the journal, she found additional pages, newer pages, written in different handwriting, dated April 1945. My name is Joseph Kramer, former professor of physics at the University of Berlin. If you're reading this, then you have discovered what we buried. I write this warning in the days after we sealed the chamber, knowing that someday someone will find it. The device in the center of the room is not dead, only dormant. We severed its connection to the entity, but the mathematics remain encoded in its structure. Anyone who studies it deeply enough, who understands its principles, could theoretically re-establish contact. We chose to bury rather than destroy it, because we fear destruction might release what it contained. We chose to bury rather than report it, because we feared anyone with power would be tempted to use it. If you have the authority to make decisions about this discovery, I beg you, do not study it. Do not try to understand it. Do not let ambition or curiosity override caution. Seal this chamber again, bury it deeper, and mark the location as hazardous. Let be forgotten. The entity we contacted promised salvation and delivered damnation. It has done this before, across human history, in civilizations that rose and fell mysteriously. It will do it again if given the chance. We were desperate men in a desperate time, and we still had the wisdom to walk away. In your hopefully more peaceful era, I pray you will have the same wisdom. My companion Thomas Richter and I have decided to disappear after writing this. If we survive the war, we will ensure no one who knew of this chamber can reveal its location. Some secrets are too dangerous to preserve. May God grant you the clarity to make the right choice. Professor Joseph Kramer, April 28, 1945 inch. Sarah closed the journal slowly, her hands trembling. She looked at the cylinder, at the dead machines, at the skeleton on the floor, a warning made flesh. She thought about her career, about the acclaim that would come from publishing this discovery, about the scientific papers, the documentaries, the lectures, about the funding that would pour into study this unprecedented find. She thought about human nature, about how every generation believed itself wiser than the last, immune to the mistakes of those who came before. And she thought about the skeleton's empty eye sockets, still bearing those impossible symbols after 50 years. Dr. Sarah Mitchell made her decision. She climbed back up the stairs to where the construction crew waited. The German Federal Observer approached her eagerly. "What did you find, Doctor? Is it safe to proceed with construction?" "Structural instability," Sarah lied smoothly. "The underground chamber shows significant degradation. My recommendation is that we fill the entire excavation with reinforced concrete before beginning construction." "For safety," the observer frowned. "That will delay the project significantly." "Are you certain?" Sarah looked him in the eye. "I'm certain. Some foundations are too unstable to build upon. We need to start fresh." 3 weeks later, the excavation was filled with concrete, and construction proceeded on schedule. Sarah Mitchell submitted a brief, boring report noting minor historical debris and structural concerns. She mentioned nothing about cylinders, entities, or warnings from the past. The leather journal she kept. Joseph Kramer had addressed it to whoever found the chamber, and she had found it. She locked it in a safety deposit box, along with her own written account of what she'd seen and the choice she'd made. On the outer page of her account, she wrote, "To whoever finds this after I'm gone, the choice I made may have been wrong. Perhaps I've deprived humanity of knowledge that could help us, but I've also potentially saved us from a danger we're not equipped to handle. Forgive me if I chose poorly. Learn from my caution or my cowardice, whichever it proves to be." That night, in her hotel room, Sarah dreamed of symbols floating in darkness, promising solutions to every human problem. In her dream, she reached out to touch them. She woke before her fingers made contact. She never went back to Berlin. Epilogue. In an undisclosed safety deposit box, the journal waits. In the ground beneath a government office building, sealed under tons of concrete, the chamber remains. The cylinder's crack has widened over the decades, and a strange liquid has long since evaporated, but the symbols remain etched into metal and bone. And somewhere in the quantum foam of reality, patient and eternal, the entity waits. It has waited for millennia and will wait for millennia more. Because humanity always finds a way to dig up what was buried. Always believes itself wise enough to control what destroyed others. Always, in moments of desperation, reaches out for salvation without counting the cost. The entity knows this. It has seen it happen countless times across countless worlds. It will happen again. It always does. Someone always digs too deep. Someone always makes contact. And when they do, it will be ready, offering hope and delivering horror, just as it always has. The cycle continues.